Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome here at the Faber Studio in St. Anna Parochie. Welcome at this very first theme night of the Media Art Festival 2020. As you may already know, the festival itself cannot take place for obvious reasons of the corona crisis, but still the festival organization is working hard, trying hard and hoping hard to make the festival take place coming year, starting at the 26th of February 2021. So for now, no festival, but still 3 theme nights, starting today with this evening, and 2 more nights tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Because of the same reasons concerning COVID, we decided to only stream this evenings online, so without a live audience and with just a few speakers and guests. And good to say, as you can already hear, all 3 evenings will be in English. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Anja Toonstra. I'm a comedian, I'm a musician, and I'm a moderator. And tonight I'll be your host, and I'll guide you through this whole evening. These theme nights, they are organized by the Media Art Festival in collaboration with the RUG Campus Friesland and the Hanze University College in Groningen. And the idea of these evenings is to have 3 interwoven online nights full of exploration, discussion, and artistic inspiration. So that sounds good. The central main theme of coming nights is here and now. And every night has its own sub-theme, which will be explored and unraveled by our guest researchers and artists. Tonight we'll talk about what we call Culturenomics. I will introduce this theme a little later. Tomorrow we'll discuss the subject of not knowing, quite a matching theme in these times of corona and crisis and uncertainty. And Thursday, on the last evening, we'll talk about our human relationship with nature and how art reflects on that theme. But for now, let's start with the first theme night. As said, tonight we'll talk about what we call Culturenomics. We invited 2 speakers, these 2 people, to, from their own perspective, zoom in on culture, the appreciation of culture and the economic value of the whole cultural sector. With as a basic question, how to create a more balanced, long-term, resilient cultural sector, and what should that sector look like in the future? Because among other things, one thing the corona crisis brought to light is that the cultural sector is not just a fragile sector, it's also a very diverse sector. The whole cultural sector was hit by this crisis last month, and that's not just the classical arts of theater, dance and visual arts. No, it's also festivals and all other aspects of the cultural sector a lot of people don't know of. Culture and culture production of today, they include much more than we once learned about it at school. And our 2 speakers will elaborate on all these matters. Our first speaker, not yet, you can stay on your chair for a little while, will be Professor Dr. Barend van Heusden. He holds the chair of Culture and Cognition in the Department of Arts, Culture and Media at the RUG University in Groningen. And our second guest is Esther Gottschalk, who is the director of the Association of Dutch Composers called New Geneco. Both will give a lecture from about 20 to 25 minutes, and afterwards we'll talk and debate together with them and with some other people that I will invite later on. We also invite you at home to take part in this discussion, so all of you feel free to ask your questions and place your remarks in the chat, and we'll try to take them with us at the end of our debate. And one more thing, if you want to donate to the festival, that's also very possible and very welcome. You'll find a link underneath the chat, and I warmly welcome you all to donate generously. But for now, I would say, Barend van Heusden, I invite you to go to the lecture. In the meanwhile, I will introduce you, Professor Dr. Barend van Heusden. As said, he is a professor who holds the chair of Culture and Cognition with a special reference to arts in the Department of Arts, Culture, Media Studies at the University of Groningen. And tonight he'll share with us his ideas and analysis of our understanding of culture. What is culture and what is art? And he'll plead for a quite fundamental re-evaluation of that understanding. It's a plea with radical proposals, with possibly drastic political and economical consequences for the whole cultural sector. Ladies and gentlemen, Barend van Heusden.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Good evening to all of you. Maybe as a starting point, we should realize ourselves that people, since time immemorial, in all cultures, in all places, everywhere, always, have made art. People have always spent energy on art. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but in general, art has been with humanity, as far as we know, forever. The question, which I would like to elaborate on tonight as a kind of starter for this discussion, is why is this? What does art bring us? And to tackle this question, I want to start by making a distinction, which is seldom made, actually, in a contemporary discussion, between art and culture. We tend to use these two terms almost as synonyms together, art and culture and art. My argument would be that art and culture are two very different things, and that by distinguishing them and by clarifying the meaning of this concept, we also get insight in what actually is art in culture and why humans have and still will spend time and energy on art. So let me try to phrase my main critique. And my main critique at this point in time, and relating to the discussions we have in contemporary cultural world, is, and is of course a little bit provocative, but that's in function of the discussion tonight, is that we actually seldom know what we are talking about. We confuse art and culture, and my idea is that this confusion serves a purpose. It's not by chance that we don't want to figure out exactly what we mean by the two terms, because the confusion and especially the fuzziness of the meaning of this concept is that it allows for all sorts of nonsense arguments and nonsense beliefs. The disadvantage of the fuzziness of the meaning of this concept is that it allows for all sorts of nonsense arguments and beliefs. So it's the advantage and it's the disadvantage. But still, the arguments are very often nonsense. And to just give you one example, this is a quote from the website from the European Cultural Foundation. Now, I have to say I'm a great fan of the European Cultural Foundation. I think what they do is marvelous and very important. But still, I think the quote from the website is nonsense. What does it say? Culture is what brings us together. It is at the basis of the European project and a catalyst for the future of Europe. Culture carries tremendous intrinsic value and contributes, etc., etc. And the point I want to make is, why would that be so? Why would art bring us together? I mean, soccer brings us together as well. And many other things bring us together. So why art? And when we talk about intrinsic values, people love to talk about intrinsic values, but what are intrinsic values? Very difficult, very hard to say. So, why is all this? Is it true? Maybe it is true, but maybe it's not. To quote my favorite philosopher, Kevertje Plop, a very old-fashioned Dutch children's philosopher. Maybe it's true, maybe not. So in order to elaborate a little bit on this, I want to take a step back and go to culture. What is culture? What makes human culture different from the culture of many other animals? Well, human culture, and I'm inevitably being rather short, so my apologies for that, but that's because of the fact that I have relatively little time. Human culture, and this is something you should recognize from your own experience, human culture always starts with an experience of difference. We continuously experience differences. If that weren't the case, we wouldn't experience time anymore. So the world is always different from what we expect, and we have to deal with that because this change, which is ubiquitous and always there, is in principle, at least for us as human beings, threatening. Change is basically threatening. Quite some philosophers have argued that the human culture, the basic drive of human culture is actually fear. Fear for the unknown. We have to deal with the unknown all the time. Now, this experience of difference is the start of culture on many levels. In evolution, humans started to experience this fear some 2 to 5, which is a crazy range, 2 to 5 million years ago. It happens in ontogenetic development. Children start to experience this difference around 3 years of age. That's when they enter culture, one could say. It is true in history. History moves forward because people have to deal with change through wars, through political change, etc. And it is true for the here and now. You are making culture at this moment because you are confronted with difference. And this difference at this moment is my speech, and you will have to deal with it. So you are cultural beings by reacting to what you hear. Okay, so this is what I call the dialectics of experience, which is the basis of human culture. We live in a double world. We always live in a world which we recognize on basis of our memories, and we live in a world which is different, and we have to deal with the dialectics. So our memory allows us to recognize what we perceive, but at the same time, what we perceive never coincides with this memory. And that creates the dialectics, the thesis, memory, and the antithesis, what eludes memory, what is different. And the funny thing is, and that's why we are not computers, we experience this doubleness, this dialectics, without any problem. We live through it every day. We don't find it a big thing, a big issue. We know this, of course. But you have to imagine that for a computer this would be completely impossible, because you have to be aware something is recognized and it is not. It's different. A computer would immediately short circuit. Something cannot be both on and off. Now, dealing with difference can be done in different ways. Basic and very recognizable ways for you is either ignoring it, what we do most of the time, destroying it. This appearance of difference creates a lot of aggression in people, because one of the ways to deal with difference is by simply beating it up. But there are 4 more, let's say, productive ways to deal with difference. And these are, first, recognizing something on the basis of similarities. I recognize you because you are similar to how I know you from yesterday. Manipulating memories to imagine new forms, creativity. Building new things out of the memories we already have. That's the idea of imagining new forms. Categorizing the world in terms of concepts. That's what we use language for. This is a show, this is a presentation, this is a lecture. General concepts which allow us to discard with the difference. Difference is not important. I simply recognize something as a certain general concept. And finally, analyzing underlying structures. This is the way we deal with difference mainly in science. In science, we try to find out what the underlying structures are that cause the difference. Which is a very, let's say, strong way to deal with it. Now, these 4 different types structure our culture. Basically, culture consists of these 4 domains: perceiving, imagining, categorizing, and analyzing. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, this cultural process can and always is also reflecting upon itself. So we can look at ourselves doing culture. We can imagine ourselves doing culture. We can categorize ourselves. So it is a so-called recursive or reflective process. A cognitive system, sorry for the jargon, a cognitive system which is able to make this distinction between past and here and now is per definition a system that can also reflect upon the process. Therefore, self-consciousness, the ability to be aware of one's own condition as a human being, is there from the beginning. Once there is culture, there is also self-consciousness. And this is important because I will argue that art is one of the basic forms of self-consciousness. If we take the 4 strategies I distinguished before and relate them to self-consciousness, we can distinguish 4 main domains of self-consciousness in culture. News and history, perceiving, self-perception. Arts and entertainment, self-imagination. Ideology, religion and politics, self-categorization. And science and scholarship, which is reflective analysis. Now, of course, the lines between these fields are not very sharp. I mean, they may mix up, but basically these are the 4 different ways in which people in culture, and cultures as a whole, reflect upon themselves. One of them being imaginative reflection, or the arts and entertainment. Now, this is an abstract discourse. It can also be represented in a way more, let's say, artifactual way. This is a drawing by Saul Steinberg, where he beautifully and imaginatively reflects upon what it means to be a drawer, an artist. So, from this perspective, art is not a thing. It's not a homogeneous entity, and it's certainly not a quality of works. And I hope this is important. Art is not a quality of works. Art is a quality of what someone does with the work. So I consider artworks tools, interesting tools, strange tools maybe, that allow us to reflect upon our existence, upon life. Not necessarily our personal, but life in general. So art can be about anything. Art can be about your experience at breakfast. Art can be about the divine. Art can be about the sublime. Art can be about really anything. Any aspect of life can be reflected upon through artifacts, through dance, music, singing, etc. So art from this perspective is a cognitive process which at least involves at least 3 dimensions. The reflective dimension, it's a form of self-consciousness or cultural consciousness. Imagination, that's the basic strategy, which distinguishes it from philosophy or religion. And the mastery of the medium in which the artifact is created, be it the body when you dance, or instruments, or literature, language, etc. To give one example, very simple example, this summer, Christo and Jean-Claude got the permission, finally, to wrap up the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Unfortunately, Christo passed, in this case the French or the Europeans or people in general, to reflect upon what an arc means. People who pass by every day will suddenly, when the thing is wrapped up, start to think, what did I actually look at? What did it mean? Etc., etc. So, I'm not saying that the wrapped up Arc de Triomphe is a work of art because of what it looks like. No, I'm saying it's a work of art because it functions for a certain audience as a tool that allows them to reflect upon their life. What does this mean for the arts in culture? Art is not special. Art is something very normal and everyday. Good art is special, but that's true for all domains of culture. It is one of the basic forms of culture, of all cultures, always and everywhere. As I argued before, if there is human culture, the dialectics of experience, then you have also self-consciousness. Second, art is, and I love to say this, instrumental. It has a function. And with a function, a use, or what I would call an intrinsic value. So there comes the intrinsic. The intrinsic value is the value of, the intrinsic value comes with the function of art to help you or help people to come to grips with their experience, or with life, or with existence. Big and small. Artworks allow us to reflect upon experience, not through abstraction, as in philosophy or politics or religion, but by re-experiencing, by imitating. That's the old concept of mimesis from Aristotle. Aristotle said art is mimesis, it's imitation. Yes, but not imitation of nature, but imitation of our experience of reality. And by imitating it, it allows us to come to grips with it. And that's what makes art interesting for everyone all over the world in all times. Not works, but the function. This is also why the arts change all the time. Arts change because the artistic function remains the same. The artistic function has always been the same. Reflect upon existence through imagination. But because the existence, the experience of people changes from class to class, from gender to gender, from nation to nation, from period to another period, that's why art changes as well. It simply follows experience. Sometimes it runs ahead of experience, but still its value is determined by the relation, the reflective relation to experience. This is also, and this is the last point, this is why we have this ambivalent, ambiguous attitude toward art. Because on the one hand, what we value very much and cherish is the fact that art allows us to come to grips with experience. And we love that. And when we hear a song, or when we read a book and we think, yes, that's how reality is, that's what life is, then we cherish it. What we don't like in art is that it doesn't solve our problems. It never comes with a solution, because it simply represents experience. So if the experience is problematic, art will represent it as a problematic experience. So if people ask, but what do I learn from art? What do I get from it? Then the answer is your experience, nothing else. But that's worthwhile, because it makes sense to know or to have an idea about what life is, or at least what it means to you. Okay, and I come to my conclusion, but from this I would conclude that in a pluralistic society, which is a society in which people have very different experiences, because of class differences, because of gender differences, because of different cultural backgrounds, we have very different experiences. That cannot but entail that the arts will be very different. We don't live any longer in a society where there is 1 or 2 or 3 or maximum 5 pillars with views on life and on existence. So from that perspective, I think the government, and when I say the government, I always think we together, we should not interfere with artists or artworks. Let's leave that to the public, for whom these artworks are made. But let's take, as a community, the responsibility for an excellent basis for the arts, conceived as our capacity to reflect upon ourselves imaginatively, which means, concretely, an excellent arts education on all levels, formal, professional, etc. That's what we should care for in all sorts of disciplines, and an excellent arts infrastructure, venues, facilities, etc. But not the arts, not the artworks, not the artist, because that is the responsibility of those for whom the artists and the artworks are made, the public. That's why I added this title to my presentation, Back to Thorbecke, because apart from the beautiful symmetry, the phonological symmetry in the sentence, Thorbecke is the 19th century politician in the Netherlands who said that the government should not judge the arts. And I think he was very right. But that does not mean, and that's probably how Thorbecke has been misinterpreted sometimes, that this does not mean that the government should not take care of the arts, but it has to take care of the arts apart from judging them. So taking care in the sense of, for instance, make certain that there's a good education, good infrastructure, but not in terms of judging which art is worthwhile. So together, as a community, we should set the conditions that allow for a rich and varied arts world as an integral dimension of a democratic culture. And a democratic culture is a culture in which different perspectives coexist and compete eventually with each other in terms of arguments. And I think the arts have an important function in that debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barend van Heusden. I invite you to come back. Yeah. Barend, you started out with the confusion about about the terms culture and arts, and that
Yes.
there is a confusion about the definitions of art and culture. Is that really so? Because I would say everybody here, in a sense, has a knowledge of what art and what culture is.
Yeah, but then of course, that's what we think. But then only when you start to press a little bit, then tell me what is culture, and tell me what is art. Then very quickly it becomes either silent, because that's difficult. I remember, it's very interesting. I remember I had a presentation some 10 years ago in Rotterdam. It was about arts education. I was asked to give a presentation on arts education, and I was introduced by someone who was in charge. And this person introduced me, told the audience who I was, and then said the lecture will be about arts education. Now, let's not go into arts, because there everybody has his own opinion. And everybody nodded. And I thought, what's this? I mean, we're talking about art education, and the core concept is considered, in a sense, void, because everyone has his own opinion on that. I thought that's dramatic.
But in a sense, art is in a void, because it's also a free place where everything should be possible to happen.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. It's not true. Not everything should be, everything should, no, that's, what does that mean? I mean, everything, I don't say, my whole argument is that art is not a void, art has a very specific function.
You said art is not special. Art is, good art is special.
Good art is special, yeah.
Which brings up the question, what is good art? How do you define good art, and who decides on that? Okay,
I define good art as art that allows someone, can be anyone, depends on who is looking or who is listening, that allows someone to come to grips, to give form to an aspect of his or her life experience. I think the best criticism you can get in a newspaper or in a blog when you are an artist is that people say it felt real. This is how life is. I think that's the highest criticism an artist can get. But that's always from the perspective of the listener. And what someone considers a representation of his or her life can be completely uninteresting to me, because I have it with different art. That's why I said art is not in the work. Art is in my relation to the work and to my life.
Okay, but when we have then this definition of what good art is, the next question is about the valorization of art and the value of art.
Yeah.
What can you say about that?
Well, my argument would be that, first of all, in order to talk sensibly about the value of art, we first have to determine what it is. So my argument is, art is the imaginative reflection on existence. Then we can say, okay, what value do we attach to that? Do we find it important to reflect, for instance, upon, do we find this reflection important? Some will say yes, others will say no, that depends. And my argument would also be that in a democratic culture, democratic society, it is important, because we are a democratic society, that different people and different groups of people, different classes, are allowed their own reflection upon life. So it certainly has consequences for the way in which we look at art. From a democratic perspective, this capacity to reflect upon who you are, it also has to do with identity, who you are, what life is, how you relate to others, is something which is not, which should not be reserved to a specific group or smaller class or elite eventually. It's something which should be available to all.
And you talk about the knowledge of knowing what art is and what culture is, and for that you also plead for a. We hear some noise here. You plead for a rethinking art education to create and learn new understanding of what culture and art is. What's lacking in that now?
Yeah, what is absolutely lacking is this basic question, which I would immediately start discussing with all children and adolescents in school, is why is there art? I mean, instead of starting making a play, for instance, I would first discuss them, why do you think people make plays? Why? And again, this has happened in all cultures. In all times, people play. Stage play. Why would you stage something? Why not simply go there and tell him? And I think this is so crucial, because as long as we don't do that, children and adolescents, and I think rightly so, ask, why should I do this? Because you are telling me? That's not very rational. And I think it should be, I think that's maybe one of the fundamental aspects of arts education, is to teach children why there is art. And a little bit, of course, in line of what I just said, that art is not something they have to admire in this work, but that art, the work, is a tool which is offered to them. And in fact, the world is full of these tools. It's incredible what there is in terms of art. So choose what you can use in order to deal with your life. And also another aspect is that I think arts education should therefore never start with art. It should not start with art, because art is not the beginning. The beginning is life, experience. Start talking about life. And I mean in the broadest sense, from your home situation to politics, to religion, and only then introduce them to art as a way to deal with that reality.
In the end of your presentation, you say we need a society in which the government takes the responsibility for a basis for the arts, but meanwhile not interfering with artists and artworks. That's quite a radical change in how we look at art and how we look at culture. Will we ever really see this change thinking in politics be possible, you think?
Well, of course, I don't know. I'm not an economist, so I'm certain that I cannot completely oversee the consequences of this perspective, but I have the impression that taking this perspective, or the perspective I would advocate, can at least solve a number of problems we have, and might provide us, if it's thought through thoroughly, might provide us with a more solid basis for arts policy as well, yes.
Which problems does it solve? Which basic problems?
One of the basic problems it would solve, according to me, is the endless discussion and debate about who is subsidized and who is not. Where indeed someone judges in name of all of us, and that is a major problem.
Like the government and politics is now in a way the gatekeeper of culture. And either the politics, but also the funds or the organizations that are installed in name of the government, of course. And you want to put that function with the audience.
Yeah, with the audience, with the public. Yeah.
We'll elaborate on this more later on, also with Esther and with some other people who are present here already. But first, let's go to Esther. I invite you to take your stage, and in the meanwhile, I'll introduce you. Esther Gottschalk. She is the director of the Association of the Dutch Composers, called New Geneco, and she represents more than 320 composers of classical, contemporary, and art music in the Netherlands. She's a strong defender and promoter of interests of composers, and she tries to raise awareness for fair pay, fair share, and fair chain in art music. Recently, she wrote, together with some other people, Fair Chain, proposing alternative models for a circular value chain for culture. And tonight she will explore different forms of cooperation and economic models to create this circular sector. Ladies and gentlemen, Esther Gottschalk.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here on this stage of the Media Art Festival. Let's talk about money. When it comes to art, money is an unimportant detail. It just happens to be a huge unimportant detail. So said Iggy Pop. I'm going to talk about a fair chain, so really zooming out and take a look at the system. For a long time, the debate is dominated by looking into the attitude or the personal entrepreneurship of the artist. All problems should be solved by the individual artist, by getting more agile, getting more resilient, getting more entrepreneurial. And however, this is a fact of life. That you need to be competitive to take your place. It is very, if we urge people to only professionalize and adapt to the current system, we overlook that there are some serious systemic bottlenecks in the system. So I took it as a responsibility to really get into a broader perspective and look at the entire value chain. And this is also a matter of an exercise in new rhetorics, finding new frames to look into the arguments for fair pay and fair share and fair chain. You said it already, the lockdown and the whole COVID crisis really brought new light to our awareness of what culture actually is. It became visible that it is so much more than we thought it was. It's not only the subsidized art world, it's also a huge cultural, creative media sector with entertainment industry, with profit and non-profit players in this whole infrastructure. Also, we found out that it has a huge impact on us, on our daily life. And we also learned, already reported in June, that there was a damage, economic damage of 2.6 billion euros in just a couple of months. I think many of us never realized how big, in economic terms, the cultural sector really is. On the other hand, it became also very clear that there is a huge lack of sustainable business models for creators, especially in the online business. When everybody went on the Facebook and on the YouTube and opening up the live streams and donation buttons, we very harshly learned that it's nice in the beginning and really people really take the effort to donate, and hopefully tonight they will also. But in the end, it's not a really sustainable business model to make a living out of your artwork. Also, we learned people have a really precarious job, being an artist, being a creator, being a camera person or an art or an actor. People have no financial buffer, the income dropped completely, and the government aid only helped up to a social minimum per household, so the TOZO, as you probably know. And for some, it was not even applicable. Some people are really in the middle of having part-time job, being self-employed, and they couldn't apply for any of the measures. Other way around. It is, many researchers show that it's really a top sector that we are talking about. The cultural, creative industries and media sector altogether has an added value of 3.7 of the GDP. And it's good for 4.5% of the national employment. This is huge. This is even bigger than agriculture. If you look at it from a pure author rights perspective, it's even bigger than that, so it's good for 6%. If you look, on the other hand, of the regular investments in the art, in the subsidized art by the Ministry of Culture, then it's less than 0.5% of the whole budget of our government. So this is a huge gap already that we are looking at. Another huge gap is an income gap that we are looking at. If you're talking about a billion economy, and you look at the average yearly income of the artists, then you see a huge income gap. The average income is less than 20,000 euros per year for the artists, for actors, for journalists, for any creative job you can imagine. And it's not only the COVID crisis that brought us in this situation. It is since the budget cuts in 2011, the whole sector managed to keep on the same level of output of performances, only it was on the expense of the freelancers and the artists. They were very badly paid, and the total earning capacity stood under great pressure from all sides. The subsidies, the sales, the price you would get if you would be booked on a stage, and online, but I will get to that. So the real question is, can an individual artist really make a living in this gig economy that we're in? I see the problem like this. Artists create create value, but they often miss out on the profit. The profit that on the value that they make lands with others. Think of the digital platforms, YouTube, Apple, Google. They run on the content that creators make. They hardly pay a fair price to the makers. It's like 0.003 cents per stream. They hardly pay any taxes, mostly, because they're international, huge companies. They make multiple billions of dollars. They're not bounded to any local national government. So they hardly contribute to any local infrastructure that is the source of all the content that is created and all the value that is created. I mean, it's all with public money that we invest in education, in the schools for composers, for visual artists. All the content is carried by that infrastructure. And now you see that platforms like, in the platform economy, they really extract the value and they pay nothing back. In the same way of looking, you can look at real estate and landowners, investors, speculators. You see very often in empty warehouses, so-called bad neighborhoods, that they bring in the artists or the creators or the small businesses, the coffee companies, to really help on the gentrification process, to upgrade the area, to create routing to this area. So later on, they kick out the artists and they build huge apartment blocks, making a lot of profit. It's not always that the artists are actively kicked out, but when the prices rise, it's unaffordable for the people who were there in the first place, or the people who were brought in to help to generate this value. Again here, and I'm talking about this big real estate investors, sometimes with really little local responsibility. This is also an extraction process that is not paying any return to the local economy. In the business climate and the tourism and leisure industry, you also see that it's very important for a city or for any area to have a creative sector, because this attracts people from outside. It is attractive for the people who live there. And in the pre-COVID times, tourism would also, of course, bring a lot of money into the city or into the area. People do not come for the hotels, or, but they come because of the atmosphere of a city, or the creative vibe that is there, or the underground scene, or the museums. So it's also there. You see, the money is made by tourism industry, but the value is created by the creative sector. So my question really is, what do these extractors, I would almost call them, what do these industries, like the digital platforms, the real estate, and the tourism industry, what do they do back for the artist? What do they do back for the neighborhoods and for the sustainable ecosystem? I already mentioned the word extraction. This comes from the American Dutch sociologist Saskia Sassen. And she uses the term extraction, like in the mining industry, the extraction of value without corresponding reinvestment in those who create the value. I find this a very helpful concept in this context. I did a research to really get into the question, how can we close the gap? Are there any possibilities? Are there any solutions even to improve the chain and to improve the income situation of artists and to overcome this process of value extraction and poor artists? So how can we make it more circular? I got into contact with the Coalition der Freie Szene in Berlin. This is a very active coalition of independent artists, and they achieved to convince, in 2014 already, to convince the local municipality to create a city tax. And not only create a city tax, but earmark 50% of the income and reinvest that in art and culture. And it was especially earmarked for the alternative scene and the independent artist, because as they argued, it's very realistic to do so, because that is the unique selling point of Berlin, to say it in a marketing term. They're not there yet. It's not like 50% for the free art scene yet. But I think, first of all, it's very important to have this argument and to have this way of thinking introduced, because it's really helpful, and it puts the art scene in a complete different context than only people who are holding their hands for subsidies. It's the complete other way around. It's the realization that there is a huge value created, that there is a huge economy of people having jobs, contribute to society, and also are entitled to make fair money out of things they offer to people's lives. One thing that is very interesting in the city tax in Berlin is that they also really looked to find ways to have stipendiums for artists and performers, to establish good working conditions, workspaces, and also work on fair pay agreements. Such one example is exhibition fee for the artists, which before that wasn't there. Digital platforms, I mentioned them before. If you look at, for the music industry, which is of course where I'm talking from, it's there is really no business model in having this digital platform. It's for the consumers, it's wonderful. You can find everything and it's almost for free. And there is exactly the big problem. By telling everyone that it could be for free to have all the music you would like all you can eat, for almost nothing. And it's, of course, we wanted music, the thing that we love most, we want it like coming for free, like water from the tap. But it is not for free. I mean, there are people with families, they make the work, they create their vision, they put it online, and they want for every user, and they're entitled to have for every user a fair share on the profit of their work. There are 1.3 billion users of music stream services, and they provide for composers and songwriters and artists, as it says here, only $865 million. And we're looking at companies that make more than $865 billion. It is really almost nothing, like 65 cents per user for the artists. I think everyone here can understand that it's, I mean, you can't make a living with a business case like this. Therefore, I think, especially with these kind of platforms, we need to find ways to, I would say, to tax the profit that has been made and bring it back to local economies and local artists so that they can create a more sustainable structure to keep on making new pieces, to keep on composing, to keep on bringing new music on the platforms. The Cultural Council in the Netherlands already proposed a system like that for the Netflix and Spotify and YouTube. So it's promising. And internationally, this is also a huge discussion to tax, to design a DIGITAX, how do you say that, for the tech giants and the digital platforms. There's no international agreement yet. But I think it's very important that we all, like we, the people, we, the governments, raise awareness on this issue. And also rethink what can we do on national level, and what can we also do from the sector in maybe agreements with parties as Deezer and Spotify to make a reinvestment fund. In the real estate, I think here as well, as I said before, it's the same argument actually, that we need some revenue share models, that if it cannot be that one party extracts all the value where the others have to live in poverty or are kicked out once they have done or have given their services. And I think it's it is possible, and it needs some, in case of a government or a landowner, that you can really set a framework of conditions to how to use artists or creatives in the development of an area or a specific building. There are some very fine examples in the United States, even, where they, the voters decided to have a cultural tax district and to earmark parts of the sales tax, so the VAT here, and the property tax for specific museums and the zoo and the art scene there. So this is a very interesting idea to really draw a line on a specific area and say, okay, the tax that we have here, some percentage of that, we will invest in the cultural world. In Brussels, there is an organization called ARP and an organization they call themselves Permanent. They had to move over and over and over again, and this really made them aware of, I will go to their quote, really made them aware of how they were used on a temporary basis to like hit and run, come into places, do their thing, and then up to the next one. They felt used as raw material in a linear process that capitalizes on real estate, and again, from which only the construction speculators benefit. So Permanent, and the name is of course what they aim for, they really want to break this, this vicious circle and get into a more sustainable, non-speculative, permanent relation with a certain area and with the local community to really add the value and not on a speculative base. There are very fine examples, I guess, all over the place. I choose two Amsterdam examples here. The NDSM-werf, they used to have their own culture tax system, also in a very isolated area, where they had profit-based and non-profit-based organizations together in one area. And they made the agreements with each and every one of them to, of course, make a difference in the rent, have commercial rent and non-profit rent, but also take a percentage of the commercial partners, such as the techno parties that took place there, the festivals, the real estate developers, and also some other companies. I think this is a very interesting model that could also work in, and does work already in other areas. Another idea that I came up with is the future Beethoven. Since we all stand on the shoulders of previous generations of artists and composers and thinkers, you might ask them the question, how do they carry us, actually? When you're looking at author rights in the composers' world, then living composers, of course, are entitled to their author rights, but you also have royalty-free compositions, like Beethoven or Mahler, Mozart. This is royalty-free work, public domain work. Wouldn't it be a very good idea to have a Beethoven tax and to allow a percentage of the proceeds from their now royalty-free works to benefit the living composers of today? Because at this moment, we see it's almost like a competition between Beethoven doesn't have to live from his royalties anymore, but a nowadays composer, of course, really needs it. So it could be a very interesting idea to have a Beethoven tax. I conclude. We cannot allow ourselves as a society to have a system that makes a division between makers and takers. I think artists really should profit a fair share from their economic value that they create. The system of profit tax and earmarked refund could really help local artists and help a fair value chain. Also, the idea of local communities who have private and public partners that really together play a role in creating a sustainable revenue share model is very promising, I think. The ideas of global big tech and big money industries to tax and to have a reinvestment fund would also really help to have a more, to have a better argument, have a better idea of what the value is of art, and to make the financial structure more sustainable. And last point, consumers really have to be more aware of the social, cultural, and even democratic costs of free art and free apps. So I end with this quote.
Thank you, Esther Gottschalk.
Thank you.
Esther, you presented quite some ideas, are worldwide examples of fair chain in the free arts, and that have been brought in practice already. When you present this kind of ideas, very concrete ideas, when you present this kind of ideas to policymakers and to government people, how do they react to this in Holland?
Yes, I did this research in the context of the labor market agenda. In 2015, we had the Economic Council report on the situation of artists. And there was an agenda of 21 points that really need to be addressed to improve the situation of the art and all the workers in the art. And one of the points was to, how do we get a fair practice? How do we get a fair chain? When I presented it to the Ministry of OCMW and the whole group involved in this labor market agenda, I think there was great enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. People think, again, also like, this is a long-term plan, and then
they are not very good at that.
So I think, the challenge for us all is to maybe cut it into pieces that we can digest and see how we can bring it further.
Yeah, so that sounds like they find it interesting, but they are not already willing to implement these kind of ideas. That takes more work.
It takes more work. I'm sure that that it will also be a focus point in the discussion on fair practice code. Mm-hmm. Because it's of course part of that. So
can you shortly explain a little bit about this? The
Fair Practice Code is literally a code that you can find online. It's an initiative coming from the art world, and Kunsten 92 as a lobby organization has created a website and the whole code. And it is really like a moral code to look into transparency, trust, sustainability, solidarity, diversity.
That's all of them.
That's all of them.
Yeah. You both had your talked about fundamental change in the cultural sector. You a little bit more from a theoretical perspective, and you from a very practical perspective, ideas that have already been brought into reality. Barend talked about the difference between culture and arts.
Yeah, I said I make it worse.
Yeah, how we have a lack of understanding of the definitions of those. Yeah. Can you relate to his visions on that?
I think on purpose I make it worse and talk about the cultural, creative and media sector because for a very simple reason, it's all related, it's interrelated. The innovations in art today are you see it back in the entertainment industry tomorrow, or vice versa. So it's all interrelated, and as a sector, I think it makes sense to talk about the whole, and also talking about culture instead of art only provides you a container for many more developments than just high art or the canonique art forms. So it gives some space, and I think it's functional to have some more space in that discussion.
Barend says a change in that change in our understanding. It starts with change in education. Can you relate to that?
It all starts with education. Yes, and that's very fundamental. And we've seen yeah, with tears in my eyes, we have looked at the leaving the education. It's not. There's no education anymore for musicians in the class, composers in the class, artists in the class.
Mm-hmm.
It's the teachers who now slowly luckily bring back art in the school class again. But yeah, that was cut out of the program for many years, and on a structural way.
Yeah.
So luckily it's coming back now.
Barend, listening to the very concrete ideas of Esther, how do you listen to that from your perspective?
Yeah, well, there is of course a kind of difference of level we are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I try to get a kind of a general picture on how, let's say, art and entertainment, by the way, I take the both together, art and entertainment function within a culture, and my plea is for a better understanding of what's happening, because I think that a better understanding will help to solve also practical problems, because people know why, for instance, we want to tax something, or why we want to invest money in things. On a more practical side, as a non-economist, so maybe I'm saying stupid things, but when I hear these tax plans, I have two questions. One on the, let's say, the bottom side, which is why can't artists simply ask the money themselves? I mean, why should you devise a kind of tax plan to bring this money back to them? Why can't they simply ask for more money for what they're doing, instead of taxing the hotels around? And the other thing is, once you have collected this tax money, and there I come, of course, to what I see as a big problem in the arts world, how are you going to distribute it? Where are you going to invest it? Because then I see a problem rising. Mm-hmm. Who gets the money which is collected by the taxes? Mm-hmm. And then, from my perspective, we are back at the old problem.
Yeah.
No, I think about that a little different. I think if you look at the ways of earning for an artist in general, then you have some direct income, like fees for commissions, sales of your product or ideas, and you have your author rights, and you have mostly some supporters in any kind. That can be the government, can be a sponsor, your neighbor, can be in kind or really money, but those are the structures directly around you. If you look at it from a value chain perspective, there are so many more parties involved than the people who pay you directly. And the value that you create is so much larger than, and it's only the people who pay your ticket that you get money from, and the people who benefit because they benefit from your value, or they make money out of the fact that you create that value, you have no relation to them. And it's also more than just a direct relation. Of course, you could go to Spotify and claim your fair fee.
Claim more money, yeah.
And of course, they need to pay a fair fee to the artists. That's one point. The other point is that a lot of those companies don't even pay taxes at all, which is a big issue. Yeah. And the third is that by doing so, they do not contribute to the whole infrastructure. I find this really important, that no artist pops up by itself. There is a structure that creates the possibility to live your life and to live according to your nature and to develop yourself, etc. And we need to. This is the whole structure that we need to see and value.
Yeah, but there we come to this other level of the distribution of the tax, and there, or the money which is collected through taxes, and there I don't know, maybe I wonder whether you would agree that this money then could best be invested in things like infrastructure, from which all the artists benefit.
Yeah.
because that would
because that's your
you have so you have the direct revenue share.
Yeah.
Like okay, your song is streamed 100,000 times, so you get instead of 50 euros, you get
100,000.
It has also has to do maybe with the different roles as an artist, or of being an autonomous artist, or also being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That's always the two sides of being an artist, and those are always battling with each other.
Yes, but I think it's at least helpful to also not just look at the individual capacities of being able to be to work hard and make a living, but also to look on the society level of what kind of country do we want to live in, and how do we want to treat artists, and what is the value of art in our lives.
But about the cultural sector itself, because we talk about how the cultural sector should be organized, or where the money should come from. Where should the cultural sector be maybe more critical on itself?
No.
No?
Well, I think what I'm also really critical on is the way the government looks into art as a very limited part of the complete pie. And that's something that the lockdown really showed, how big this pie really is. So, and I think the government, government like national but also local governments should design, like in all the top sectors, there are many tools that for different needs. So there is start-up investments, there is guarantees, there's loans, there are subsidies for things that there is heritage that cannot exist without any subsidy, that doesn't exist in the market. So you need this whole toolbox for the different needs, and not just look at subsidies for the big institutions and the orchestras and the operas.
But what about how the cultural sector organizes itself together to partner up together? How well is the sector organized at this moment?
At this moment, well, it's
you are part
better
of
than
this
ever.
organization. It's part of your effort.
Yes. Yes, I'm part of the Creative Coalition. That is the organization of all creators organizations, so the journalists, writers, actors, composers, musicians, but also the technicians and all other kind of workers in the cultural domain. And so we're directly involved in the talks with the minister and with the other organizations for the entertainment industry, for the institutions. So this is really well organized now. And of course it's because there is an urgency and a need. But it's good to learn that when it's necessary that we are all there together.
Yeah, the organization is now there.
Yeah.
As said before, we have got two more guests who I want to invite to the stage right now. Hein Kuijken, he is the Councillor of Finance and Culture in the city of Leeuwarden. And Jaap Hoekstra, he is a real estate. This is Jaap Hoekstra, and this is Hein Kuijken. Jaap Hoekstra is a real estate investor, entrepreneur here around Leeuwarden. To start with Mr. Kuijken. You are a councillor. You've been a councillor in Leeuwarden now for 5 months.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, these were all Corona months. How well did you get to know your sectors?
I think it's difficult during COVID, because in normal times you can get to experience the cultural life in Leeuwarden, and now I had to, learn a lot about the cultural sector in Leeuwarden by papers, and that's difficult.
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to 21.
Yeah. To see all culture being brought into practice and not on a theoretical level as you see it now.
Yeah, that's true.
What did you, as a counselor of culture and finance also, take from Esther's story about her fair chain ideas?
I thought it was very inspiring to get some more profits, to reallocate money and bring it back to the makers. I think that's a very interesting idea. I think we also do a little bit of that in Leeuwarden as well. A lot of cities do it. They tax tourists, and the benefits of that tax are now in Leeuwarden are also pointed towards the cultural sector. So, but I think it's too little. So, yeah, maybe we should expand this kind of thinking in the future, and Leeuwarden has an open mind towards it.
What could Leeuwarden do more on the fair chain side for you, maybe?
Well, it's very good to learn that there is this city tax idea already, and it would be good to earmark it also for the different sections and also for the makers. But I think in general, as a cultural capital, of course, there is a huge awareness of the whole infrastructure of culture and what it does for your area, and I think that is already you're ahead of many other cities than just by having gone through this process.
Yeah, I think it has changed over the last years. Being the European capital of culture made a lot of people aware of the value of culture, and you see nowadays that also entrepreneurs in our city center are willing to spend money on cultural things. Cultural activities.
In Leeuwarden, that's because you were the European capital of culture.
Yes.
So that's like a pressure cooker in which all things suddenly become possible. But still, for the rest, there is also a lot of hesitance with politicians and policymakers. Do you understand that?
No. I think it's true. There's a lot of hesitation. But what I see in Friesland and in Leeuwarden, the hesitation has gone smaller. Yeah. So there is. You used to talk about and discuss about if it was necessary to spend money on culture, and now the discussion is how do we spend our money right on culture? Yeah. And that's profit. That's a big step forwards, in my opinion.
Isn't it one of the problems with these kind of ideas that are all ideas of that demand a kind of a long breath, ideas of longevity, and that a lot of policy making is quite short-term based?
True. I think it's true in a lot of democracies, but but especially in Holland we live by 4-year terms. A lot of politicians make plans for 4 years, and I think it should be better when we take a longer horizon. And in Leeuwarden, we now took a horizon, and in the province as well, of 8 years, when it now comes down to making policy on culture, so that you get more longevity in your plans. Yeah.
So there is willingness from the side of Leeuwarden. I read in your piece, I read one of your recommendations was to create a fair chain pilot environment somewhere in an urban region. Would Leeuwarden fit for that?
Absolutely. I think mid-sized cities, as opposed to like New York or Berlin, I think that there would be the perfect field lab surroundings, because I think there's, just to give you an example, I worked for many years in Heerlen, a city in the south of the Netherlands, and I was really struck by the sense of urgency that the people and the businesses and the theaters and have for the importance of culture and to improve altogether the whole standard and the situation of the city. And this idea of a community and awareness and urgency, I think that's what you need. Then you can do everything.
And would you, as a councillor, be glad to lend your city for this experimental garden, maybe?
Of course. Like I said before, we have an open mind towards good plans, and I like the direction this plan goes to. So
Yeah.
why not? And we should, maybe we should think about some practical problems here. But what you see is that the point of Esther was a lot of money is extracted by big multinationals. Now, we're not, as municipality, we're not in a position to tackle that problem.
Mm-hmm.
But let's sit together and look at what can be done.
Mr. Hoekstra, you are a real estate entrepreneur, investor, a businessman.
Yeah.
How do you listen to the ideas that are presented tonight about the cultural sector?
Yeah, I like Esther, her ideas. So maybe strange for a real estate investor, but it's not good that the big money takes. That I subscribe. Yes.
Yeah. Do you see a responsibility for yourself as a real estate man? Do you see a role for yourself in the cultural sector to have a responsibility in that?
Yeah, on a daily basis I take that responsibility by sponsoring the use of real estate, or for example the municipality or Leeuwarden asked me, do you have a location for a movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course I have, and then we work together. And just a small example of the daily things.
Yeah, can you elaborate more on that? All the things you do, because in my view, you do quite a lot for the cultural sector in.
I give a small newspaper, and then I tell what's happening on our location, on our part of the world in Leeuwarden, and also very. Busy with sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about gentrification, and sometimes gentrification is not good. You have to keep it raw. That's nice to keep, but it's very hard in Holland because of all the rules within the sustainability we want to go to a fossil-free world.
Mm-hmm. So you as an investor, you take your role in this, you take your responsibility in the culture sector. Why do you do that? Is that just for the love of art and the love of culture, or is it also in a way profitable for you as a businessman?
No, I'd like to play, and it's also profitable, but that's not the main issue to do. Why? Because I do. That's the main reason.
Hein, Barend was talking about basic other organization of the cultural sector, about the government that should not interfere with artists or artwork, just take the responsibility for an excellent basis for the arts. Mm-hmm. How do you, as a politician, listen to that idea?
Yeah, I thought the professor's speech gave a lot of things to... sparked a lot of thoughts. Mm-hmm. So maybe a lot of things he addressed. I should take a night of sleep over it and rethink about it. What I really could relate to was the thing he addressed about culture education. Huh? We could make a better effort on that. Culture education or arts education, what the right term might be. I think Leeuwarden also has developed in facilitating art education. Mm-hmm. This morning, when we had a meeting with the mayor and the other councillors, and we made some big decisions about art education for the next year. And Leeuwarden also puts 1.2 million again in art education to facilitate schools in letting art education be a bigger part of their program.
Yeah.
So I think Leeuwarden is on the right way. But when you look at the people on high school in Holland, it's very minimalistic art education. So we could step up a little bit over
on
there.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you all for now. As I stated at the start, there was also a possibility for questions from the audience at home, the online people. Questions, reactions. Irene is over there. Irene, you collected all the online response.
Yes.
Was
Yeah.
there a little response online?
There was a little response. Thank you, everybody, also, because we got a lot of feedback and various messages. We have two really interesting questions, I think, one for each of our speakers. The first one is for Barend, of course. You said, this was a really interesting phrase, culture always starts with difference. So the question is then, without the other, is there no culture? And then they have a kind of a second part to the question. Maybe culture starts with being, expressed in and through traditions or habits. So there's kind of two questions there. Is there no culture without the other? And does culture start with being?
Yeah, beautiful questions. The answer to the first question would indeed be yes. That's right. You need the other for culture. Culture requires a difference, be it in the other person. And we know this. I mean, we all experience this. We know that anyone we encounter, you tonight, is different from me. And there is a difference which I can't grasp, basically. We are unable to know the other person as we know ourselves. So there is this difference indeed, and it can be another in terms of a person, can be another in terms of another background, nation, gender, whatever. So yes, difference is a basic prerequisite for culture. Otherwise culture doesn't work. Time would stop if there were no otherness. And we would simply recognize, fine, I recognize. The other thing about tradition is that I would argue that traditions are one of the ways in which we deal with difference. That traditions, for instance, in the way we speak, or in the way we dress, or in the way we eat, are ways to, in a sense, cope with this difference, because we are creating an identity. We create something which is stable, so which helps us to deal with the difference. And I think actually one of the reasons why there is, let's say, why we have a problem with populism today, is that because of the complexity of contemporary society and the quick changes, people tend indeed to retreat into tradition, because tradition provides them with a hold, sense of security. So yes, so I would say tradition in relation to difference is one of the ways in which we cope with difference. And one of the interesting things about tradition actually is that tradition again is a kind of myth. No tradition is fixed. All traditions change, and that's interesting about traditions, because they resist change, but they adapt a little bit. See the whole Black Pete discussion. These are traditions, but they adapt. And it's very interesting to see how working with tradition is in fact a kind of continuous compromise between the need for identity and stability and the need to adapt to new circumstances. And this again would be something which I would say is part of culture education. This is something we have to teach. Children, and especially adolescents, should realize that this is how the process goes, which would give them more grip on their life.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Really nice and really interesting to think about culture in this changing and dynamic sort of way, and really existential as well, this question. Our other one, we're going from a philosophical question to a really hard-hitting kind of straight to the money one for you, Esther. This person wants to hear more about the future Beethoven tax. So who's going to pay it? And is it expended to all public domain culture pieces, perhaps extended? What can you tell us?
Good question. Well, let me tell you first why the idea comes up. I'm representing the composers in the Netherlands, and they're mostly in the so-called classical domain, contemporary, modern domain. But if you, for instance, look at the orchestras and their repertoire, then over the past 5 years we found that it's only 1% of the entire repertoire that they play that is contemporary or is author rights based work. So it's only 1%. That quite shocked us, I must say. And I know, of course, orchestras love to play the musical heritage, and they do it wonderfully, and we all love to hear and see Mahler and Beethoven, etc. And the thing is, with author rights, if they perform a piece of today by Calliope Tsupaki or Jacob ter Veldhuis or Jacob TV or whoever, then they have to pay like 7% over the entire income of the tickets to the artist, or to Buma, and Buma pays to the artist. And over the Beethoven repertoire, nothing. So it makes it more, it's an extra obstacle. I mean, probably not, I mean, of course, there are many reasons to choose your repertoire, but it is an obstacle that you have to pay for the living artists. You could look at it that way. Of course, it's an honor that you can play the works and you can support the living artist. But in the contrast of the public domain work, there is a difference. So why not take away the difference, get more money, and support local and living artists more and more? And how exactly, and if Beethoven tax should also pay for, I mean, the Beatle tax in the future should pay for future rock bands or pop bands. And it would be, for many years the pop songs didn't have to think about this issue because it was reasonably young. But they will get there in the end as well. And in the classical world, you're looking at 400 years of repertoire history, and only this percentage of living works of music of today. So, yeah, the devil is in the details, but I think the general idea is what gets us starting to think about this and think about it further and further, and we will come up with something.
Thank you. With this, I think we have to close up for today. We tried to explore art and culture tonight, a little bit, the definition of art, the appreciation of art, and the economic value of art. We heard some interesting ideas from our two guests about definitions of art and culture, education, valuing, and shaping the whole sector. And we heard some sometimes quite radical proposals how to tackle all these issues. But also, we heard from the counselor, we heard some willingness to bring some ideas into practice, maybe.
From both of
for at least here in Leeuwarden. With this, we've come to this to the end of this first theme night of the Media Art Festival. 2 more nights to come. Tomorrow we'll discuss the subject of not knowing. As I said, very fitting in this area, in this era of crisis and uncertainty. Thursday night we'll talk about art and our relationship, about art and our relationship with nature. Both nights start at the same time, 8 o'clock, at the same online place. And all the people at home, I welcome you all to join us again and to participate in the discussion again. For now, I want to thank some people. I want to thank the people from the Faber studio here in St. Anna Parochie. Thanks also to the organization of the Media Art Festival. And a very special thanks for our guests of tonight, Barend van Heusden, Esther Gottschalk, Jaap Hoekstra, and Hein Keuken. Give them a little applause. My name is Anja Toonstra. I thank you all for attending this evening. Hope to see you the next nights. Enjoy the rest of your night and see you soon. Bye.
Disease of love we almost break until you find me out. Disease of time we almost say until I see your eyes. Disease of love we almost break until you find me out. Disease of love, 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 love.